Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My guest this week is National Master Daniel Lowinger. Dan is a fellow New Yorker, fellow Long Islander, actually. He reached a master rating of 2200 USCF after college and continued to improve as an adult, eventually earning the title of Life Master. For those who may not be familiar, Life Master is a chess title awarded by the U.S. Chess Federation for those who have maintained a rating of over 2200 for at least 300 USCF rated tournament games. So Dan, welcome to the podcast. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. First of all, I'd like to say congratulations. Thank you for doing this. Congratulations on a successful podcast. I think this is a great thing that you're doing. I was listening to some of your previous, podcasts. So I think it's a great service, really wonderful, interesting guests. And I also wanted to say thank you for sort of including me as an honorary Long Islander, even though I've moved away now for quite some time. It's nice to still be part of the club in a way.
Oh, absolutely. So where are you now?
I moved around a bit after Long Island. Right now, I'm now 10 years in Northern Virginia.
Okay. All right. Nice down there, right?
Yeah, really nice down there. And actually, very interesting thing is that when I moved down here, I was concerned that I didn't have any connection to this area really, and I was concerned that I was going to be sort of losing touch with some of my with chess and with some of the chess roots that I had. But as a matter of fact, there's quite a bit of chess down here, and that involves a lot of the players from up there. So I've been able to keep in touch with a number of folks, and I'll throw a name out there because I was just chatting with him at the last tournament. But Harold Stenzel, who I guess people who are members of your podcast probably know, he directs some of the tournaments down here as well. So I was able to catch up with him at the last tournament, have a chat with him. That was really nice. And a lot of the players in sort of Long Island, New York area will come down here for some of our events. So it's been really nice, actually.
That's great. A lot of people are also, like yourself, permanently moving out of New York, heading down south. It's just so expensive here now. So, I think they're calling North Carolina like Little New York. Oh, that's something I've heard.
Yeah, I actually, it's funny because I had looked at North Carolina myself, but I can tell you that where I am right here in Arlington, not far from DC, prices are also not, they're not New York prices, but they are pretty close.
Yeah, no, it's bad. Everything's so expensive. So, all right. So going back to New York and your roots, maybe you could just give us a little bit of background about when you started playing in tournaments and how you progressed to National Master.
Yeah. So, I grew up in Great Neck on Long Island. That's really where I first encountered chess. I was very lucky because there was a weekly chess club every Tuesday night in the facility that was called Great Neck House, which was basically like a town community center. And it was a great chess club. They had players all the way from beginners like me, all the way up through National Masters. There were, 3 or 4 National Masters would come by, and it was every Tuesday night from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. And then sometimes we'd kind of take it to a local diner afterwards. It was a lot of blitz. It was a lot of characters, people with very strong personalities, which made it really fun. There was like a ladder to climb, so to speak. You could, it was very motivating because there was always the next person to try to, snag a win from. And then you felt like you were getting better, and then you could go to the next person and the next person. And so that's kind of how I got started. And then, at some point they suggested that I try some tournaments. And the nearest tournament was the Mineola Chess Club. So it was about a half hour, like from my house, and so I started going there on Monday nights. And of course, I'm sure everybody who's listening, or most of the people who are listening, are familiar with the club there. And so then I got to, play sort of serious chess for the first time, and then from there, of course, the next step was to play in tournaments in New York City. So at the Manhattan Chess Club at that time, and at the Marshall Chess Club, and and then I started taking chess lessons and analyzing my games, and sort of the normal routine, I guess. Yeah, and then like I said, by the time I went off to college, I was an expert level player, and so I was very invested and continued on from there. Played in college, and then when I left college, I eventually made master.
Now, speaking of master, okay, as most of the listeners know, a master ranking is a U.S. chess rating of 2,200 or higher. But once you hit 2,200, you're a master. Now, it's sort of like being president, because once you earn the title of master, even if it dips below, you still keep the title, right? You're still a master. Life master, of course, as I mentioned, is if you play 300 rated games at that level. But what's your thought about keeping the master title if you dip back below 2,200? Any thoughts on that, or maybe rating floors in general?
It might be the case that I am mistaken in my understanding of the situation. So I might be just factually wrong here, but my understanding is that a master is somebody who has a rating of 2,200. I mean, maybe I should backtrack a little bit. I mean, first of all, I'm not really a big somebody who puts a lot of stock in titles, really, to begin with, and I actually think that titles can get in the way of the kind of motivation that I think actually leads to more success and, ironically, more titles. But having said that, just to answer your question, I mean, you compare it to the presidency. When you leave the presidency, my understanding is you're an ex-president. I mean, if uh, that would that officially you don't bear the title of president anymore. So, I think that, and like I said, in a way, it's kind of like a non-issue, right? It's sort of semantics. So then I think the question is really, why do so many people refer to themselves as chess masters, when either they're not, never have been, or have been at one time, but are no longer, at that level. And I think that that's something that is maybe worth thinking about, because when you say I'm a master, it's sort of a code. I think it's a title is sort of it's a shorthand way of saying, right, like when you say I'm president of the United States, that's a shorthand way of saying I control the military. I have certain powers and decisions that I currently hold. You don't have to spell everything out, because you just say I'm president. People know what that means. I think when you say I'm master, you're saying, I can play chess at a certain level relative to the rest of, to other people, whatever that top, percent is. I think there are a lot of people, for financial reasons, or because they're trying to get students, or whatever the case may be, or maybe it's just a point of pride, but they say I'm a master. And if the other person, if the listener, and this is where I get back to when I said maybe I'm mistaken in my understanding, because it's really about what are you communicating when you say that, and what you're communicating is what the other person hears you to be saying. So when someone tells me they're something or other, they have some title, they're a black belt in karate, or they're the heavyweight champion of the world in boxing. If somebody comes up to me and says, I'm the heavyweight boxing champion of the world, do you want to fight me? I'm going to say absolutely not. I'm terrified of you, because what you've just told me is that you're going to wipe the floor with me, and I'm going to be sent to the hospital. Now, if it turns out that you were the heavyweight boxing champion of the world 45 years ago, and you haven't moved since then, and you've been on a steady diet of I don't know carbs only for the last 45 years and haven't lifted a finger, well, now I've misunderstood you, or it doesn't really matter where the fault lies. It's more that we've had a miscommunication. We've had a misunderstanding of right. So I think more important than the sort of terminology is what is being communicated. What content are you trying to tell me? And I think that the titles really only have meaning if we have an agreed upon understanding of what that is. And like I said, there may be one that I'm out of the loop on. But my understanding is if you say I'm president of the United States, it means, okay, I think you can do these things. You can do certain, things for our country, and you can do them right now. And if you say I'm a chess master, it means to me that you can compete right now at a certain level relative to other people. And in some cases it's not a super extreme thing. Somebody's 2198 or whatever, they dip below, but I see some extreme cases where, for example, somebody's FIDE rating, because FIDE, does not have floors, at least that's my understanding, and so in that way, it more accurately measures where you currently are. And, I can think of some people right now in my mind. Of course, I'm not going to name them, but I'm just, I can think of a number of people where, maybe they're floored even at 2100 or 2000, and they were a master a long time ago. And they advertise that, to, let's say, to get students, but then their FIDE rating is, 1600 or something like that. So again, yeah, I think it's just more, I think the question really is twofold. I mean, two issues that I would think about. Like, one is what are you really trying to tell me? What is it that you're trying to have me believe about you? And then secondly, if you're not a master at the moment that you say that, then, I would flip the question around and say, why is it that that's so important to you then to use that word?
I agree with one thing you said early on, which I think I think this is what you were saying. There's sort of this obsession with titles now and labeling. And I think with a lot of club players, when we talk about improvement, this is something I mentioned before. It's either like you get to a certain rating or you've failed as an improver, right? It's either I get to 2000 or I've failed in my chess improvement, or I get to 2200 or I've failed in my chess improvement. Like, do you get that sense as well?
Yeah, I think some people, have that kind of mentality, and I think that that's a shame. Actually, I think that, and I think that that's holding a lot of folks back from their own improvement because, in my day job, I'm a teacher, and I mean, I also teach chess and so forth. But my main job is as a high school teacher, and I've been doing that for 20 years. And and I have a master's degree in education, and so forth. And some of the things that I learned along the way are about, the science of learning. There's sort of a science to this, and it's not a complete science. There's a lot of mystery left, of course. But, when it comes to learning, of course, this is not going to surprise anybody. You don't need a degree to know this, but, it has a lot to do with, your motivation. People who are obviously, there's motivation in terms of how much of it do you have. And then there's also what kind of motivation is it? It's best to have a lot of the motivation and then the right kind of the motivation, right? And so, the typical distinction is between internal and external, motivation, right? So are you motivated by external things like money and status and titles and glory and riches and honor, being ahead of other people and so forth? Or are you motivated because of the thing itself, whatever that is, chess, music or whatever? So the people I think who get to the furthest, it's sort of, I think, very closely related to these two things, right? Like, how much motivation do you have? And then do you have the right kind of motivation? And there are other factors too that, influence how well you do. But I think those are two of the big ones. And I think I think among the top players, by far, I think, they all have, a lot of internal motivation. They all find chess to be very satisfying and beautiful and meaningful, and they would find it that way regardless of some of these external factors.
The intrinsic versus like extrinsic, that's a big thing. Yeah, it's a very good point. Now, Dan, I know you have some thoughts about the connection between chess and life. You kind of started to touch on this a little bit, but I thought we could talk about it as far as the game itself, how life and one's attitude and one's philosophy is related to things like move choices and even draw offers during a game. I'm wondering if you could sort of speak about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if I remember, we had a little bit of a chat, before we started recording, and I think I just said something along the lines of, that chess is something that we do as, that people do as part of their lives. And, I mean, so therefore how we approach chess is, connected to how we approach, our lives in general. I was interested actually when I was listening to some of your back podcasts in, what one of your other guests, Rob Guevara, was talking about, and I think you were asking him about draw offers. And Rob was somebody who was sort of in my circle when I was growing up. He's a very thoughtful person, and so I really enjoyed that podcast that you had with him. I also remembered that about him, that he had this that he was very resistant to draw offers, and I think that Rob is, at least the way I remember him, is this good example of what I was just saying, is that his motivation for playing the game, and I think he says something like this in the podcast, is he really enjoys, right? It's an internal kind of motivation, right? He'd rather lose than have the game end because he has a real just internal enjoyment from the process of playing the game itself. That the game for him is full of wonder and mystery and joy and excitement. And I think that is one of the reasons why Rob is such a great chess player, so successful as a chess player. Now, on the other hand, if you are in a financial bind and, chess is something that you need for your livelihood, right? Well, then I think it's natural that your motivation structure is going to be a little different. You're going to be more amenable to draw offers that put you into the prize fund. You're going to be looking for different kinds of opportunities. Maybe you might even have a impact on how you select your opening choices, or how you it could have it can go very deep, these things. That's really your life circumstances, and sort of your who you are outside of chess is now sort of having an impact, right, on how you play your chess. I think that all of those things are, and that chess is not unique in that way. I mean, when people decide whether to go to college or take a part-time job, or what to major in or what to study, folks who, let's say, have the luxury of, making decisions based purely on, let's say, their passion for something, are in a different position, having to do with their life circumstances, than somebody who maybe, has to do something for some other reason, or, is trying to go into the family business, or, they have something set up for them that predates their engagement with that activity. So again, I think it's the same thing with chess. I just thought the person who popped into my head just now was Hikaru Nakamura, who everybody knows. And, he was also in the New York chess scene, of course, when he was very young. His family, his brother, his older brother, and his stepfather, prominent chess coach and chess master. So that's something that, he brought to the table that predated his engagement with chess. So all of these things, I think that's all I meant, really. Nothing mind-blowingly insightful there. Just that, we all come from somewhere, and we're all situated in certain circumstances, and these things impact who we are, and what's valuable to us, and why we make the decisions we make. And then if we play chess as part of our life, then that's going to also, just like everything else we do, is going to just be a piece of that same puzzle. That's all.
Let's jump to playing kids, because this is a big topic of conversation among adult amateur tournament players. Because from what I'm hearing, I haven't been at these major weekend tournaments myself in quite some time, because I have the club and I'm more of a weekly club guy. That's just kind of my scene. But these weekend tournaments, the Continental Chess Association events, for example, for those of you outside of the US, the CCA, or the Continental Chess Association, they run most of the major weekend events here in the States. They're not the only organization, but they're probably the most prominent one. And what I'm hearing at these weekend tournaments is they're being dominated by kids, a lot of kids playing. And this is where the whole idea of rating deflation comes in, where you have these kids who are playing at a level that is much higher than their listed rating. In other words, their ratings aren't catching up to their strengths. And a lot of adults have these stereotypes about kids. They can't play end games. They only know tactics, when in fact that may not be true. And it could be the adults who are the poor endgame players, actually, and they're just kind of making excuses. But Dan, I know you kind of have some thoughts on this, so I was hoping you could kind of take it from there.
Yeah. So, well, there's a lot to unpack in what you said. I don't know that I necessarily agree with the characterization that that their level is, that their rating is not sort of aligned with their level. I think that, or that, I mean, it really depends how you view it. I think that, it's not a fixed mark, it's not a fixed target, what we're talking about. It's a moving target. The rating system, what it means. Again, it's sort of like when you say you're a master, right? It's a code. I tell my students, so I'm a teacher, right? And I give my students grades, and I tell my students, look, the grade, if you get an A, it's a code. It's not a meaningless letter, right? It says that you have a certain level of mastery of this material, right? It just doesn't spell it out in all those words. It does a one letter, but it's a code. We both understand what the code means. You completed all your work. You showed that you could complete these tasks. That's what the code means. I could just type it all out in sentences, right? You completed all the tasks. You did them excellently. Your grammar is very strong. Your vocabulary is diverse. But instead, I give you this code, and we both know what it means. And I think that this is part of the issue with ratings and with titles and with language in general, is that words are codes. The whole point of them is that I try to take what's my understanding of something in my mind and use this code to transfer it to your mind. But if you read the code differently, if you're using a different decoding device, then that's when we get into some issues. So again, I guess you can say it's a little bit philosophical in the sense that you have to think to yourself, what does this rating mean? And our understanding of chess has grown enormously, and continues to grow at an accelerated pace, thanks to technology, and it always has. This is not an issue that's unique to the computer era or anything like that. Before the computers, there was paper and pen, and people would note down their discoveries and observations about chess, and the next generation would benefit from that. So it stands to reason that somebody who's rated 1800 in 1980 is not going to be. They might be the same strength, but the rest of the chess community has moved forward, right? So to really, it's like a treadmill. If you're standing still, then you're moving backwards, or at least you'll perceive it as if you're moving backwards. In fact, you're not moving backwards, really. It really depends on how you look at the situation. Okay. So in that sense, some people will say, and people have said to me that, some of these views are a little philosophical, but I don't think they are, or I don't think that I'm doing this to be philosophical. I'm just doing this because I think that's just how the reality of the situation is. If I play against someone and I win, and then I tell them, here, read these 20 chess books, and then while they're reading those 20 chess books, I don't do anything. Well, then the next time we play, if they beat me, did I get worse? No, I didn't get worse, right? But that other person has caught up, and that's what's happening. So yeah, so I think that that's one issue, is this idea that I think some people have this this feeling of, I don't want to use this. I'm trying to think of a different word other than entitlement, because that has such a negative feel to it. But you're not really, you have to earn it every time at the chessboard. When I sit down against somebody who's a kid or anybody, an adult, and I'm rated 2200 something, it doesn't really matter what they're rated. They get the same 16 pieces that I get, and I don't feel entitled, to a victory, that they owe it to me. They don't owe me anything. They get to play their game. I get to play my game, and may the best player win. So it's not like, well, I'm a master. This goes back to this sort of like, what are we really saying when we say I'm a master? Does this mean that you're supposed to collapse, before me? I don't think so. Yeah, I was rambling a little bit there, but
No. It's good. It's good stuff, because it's kind of looking at this whole thing from the big picture point of view. What about honesty? Because I know we were chatting a little bit before, and you believe players need to be honest with themselves and how that's vital to improvement. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Dan?
yeah. So I think that, again, nothing mind blowing here. I think I think that's part of the whole kind of growth mindset thing, right? Like, but and going back in chess history, this is something Botvinnik talked a lot about, right? The sort of rigorous analysis of one's own games, and honesty is the foundation. If you can't admit that there's some flaws in your thinking, or then you can't grow. Again, this is just, I think, really factual and very simple. Frankly, nothing here to see. Somebody who's unable to admit any kind of flaw in themselves, by definition, is not going to grow, because grow means, right, you have to say, okay, there's room for me to be better. And now if there's room for me to be better, the next step is to go find where it is, right? Or it's like, what is it? Alcoholics Anonymous, right? The first step is admitting that you have some growth that you need to make. If you can't admit that, and a lot of people can't. I think that a lot of adults in particular can't, they have trouble with that. And that's not a knock on them. I think that that's just natural. When you're a kid, you don't have as much invested emotionally and otherwise in the way that you are. And this is not just chess, right? This gets back to, you said, chess in life. When you're a kid, you're not deeply invested in strong opinions on anything. You're basically an open, carte blanche. You're there to soak up new stuff and learn new things, and you don't have any prejudices or biases in chess or anywhere, really. But then as you go through and time, goes on, you start to become, invested, psychologically, emotionally, maybe financially, whatever, in your positions and in your, decisions that you've made in the past and so forth and so on, your memories, positive memories and so forth. And by the way, this happens at all levels. I remember Anand was talking about this in an interview. He was saying that, because Anand is an amazing example of longevity in chess and staying at the top. There are folks who've done this, Smyslov, Korchnoi, probably. I'm sure Magnus, will probably do this as well. I was just listening to a podcast by Fabiano who was talking about this. But, so anyway, Anand was asked this question, and he said that when he plays with the computer, it's like it's constantly kind of making him question his previous assumptions about things, and he has to keep revising, which is humbling. And so, imagine if it's humbling. I mean, he's a world champion, and he's still, what he says is what he thinks about the position is insufficient. I remember Kasparov also said something like, the computer came up in like 5 minutes. Basically, the essence of what he said was basically in 5 minutes, the computer refuted like his entire preparation for the 1993 World Championship match with Short. This is like teams of grandmasters over months or whatever. The whole thing was like, refuted in 5 minutes by the machine. So, that's I think very difficult for a lot of people. It has nothing to do with the fact that you're an adult, other than just an adult by definition means that time has gone on and you've become more invested in these things. Children, they just, they don't have that obstacle to overcome.
I think also a lot of adult club players, whatever, 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 players, that type of range, they're in denial about what their weaknesses are. It's kind of what you were saying. And they think the answer is, well, to get more chess books or more courses. But if the issue is that they keep getting into time trouble because of perfectionism, buying more books or studying more theory may not help with that. If it's that they're thinking every move their opponent makes is a mating threat, you follow what I'm saying? Like,
Oh,
there are these mental errors that they're in denial about that no amount of chess instructional material is going to clean up. It just comes through experience and self-awareness. Would you agree?
Well, I would definitely agree that the self-awareness thing, I think, is enormous. I mean, what we can ask this question, like, what is National Master, right? What is a rating, and what is chess, right? I mean, the thing is that, chess is really it's the solving of unique problems, right? That share something with your experience. But, in every chess game, especially at the 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 club level, but even at the top levels, the majority of what people are doing, yes, there are games that go 20 moves of theory and nobody's played a single move. But in general, overall, everybody is looking at a position for the first time at some point in the game. And most of chess, is that. So it's how you think. That's what's really important. It's, like you said, you could memorize, more theory, or you could, get more instructional material, as you say. But if your thinking is flawed in some kind of way, then that is a sort of a disease that's going to show up. It's not a whack-a-mole thing. You can't say, well, I'm going to take care of it. It's just in this position or that position. No, that's something that's going to infect the entire organism in a way.
For adults who have limited study time, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Most of our listeners, myself included, we can only devote so much time to studying chess. You have any thoughts on that? Like what areas they should or should not focus on the most? Is it really dependent upon the person? I don't know if you have some general ideas that you want to share, because there's a lot of different things, floating out there, like just focus on tactics, this, that, and the other thing. Just wondering what your take is.
Yeah. So again, there's like a sort of, the longer answer, the shorter answer, depends how much we want to unpack on this. I would say, let me give some examples stand out from, because I've coached a lot of adults. Like I had an adult once. This is a pretty extreme example, but I'll just start there because, I had an adult student once who said that they didn't want to sacrifice any pieces. Like they felt like, in order to dominate their opponent, they really wanted to like learn to dominate their opponent. And they felt like if they were giving up pieces, like even if they won at the end, if they were down to just like king and rook, then they felt like they had basically lost also, they only won by a little bit. So they said, look, you have to teach me, like I want all of my pieces alive at the end. Like I want to be a complete domination. Again, that's a pretty extreme example. Okay. But I was a person like that and they were paying me, every week to teach them. And that was their like, their thing. So that's like a pretty clear example, right? Of like, you're trying to bend the game to your will. You're not open to the idea that your think, that what you want is not aligned with, how the game works. And I think, like I said, that's an extreme example. There was another person who was much higher rated. They were like 1600. That first person was like an 1,000 or 900 rated player, but the other adult I had was like 1,600. But they had a similar kind of thing in the sense that they, were very rigid about a number of things. But for example, like their opening systems, they had these opening systems that they had played for a long time or whatever, and there were these flaws, and I mean, they were dubious openings, and this is a good example of this because they had fond memories of it and they felt very attached to it and they didn't feel comfortable leaving that kind of comfort zone. And I sympathize with that very strongly, especially when I was growing up. I had a similar feeling about my opening systems. They were sort of tricky openings, but they weren't really aligned with the real principles of chess, let's put it that way, deeper strategies. And the thing is that, again, as I say, it's not a fixed target. Chess keeps moving on. So in the pre-computer age, in the age when people didn't really know as much, that could get you to a certain level. But if you just keep relying on the same old thing, if you're not adapting with the times, I think that chess is not totally unique in this way. If you're not keeping up, then it's that treadmill analogy. Then you are falling behind just because other people are moving forward on you. And so he said the same thing to me. He's like, look, here's some red lines for me. I'm not going to, I want you to teach me, but we need to stay within these kind of parameters. Anytime you put, these kind of artificial parameters on something like that. And I think what I'm saying is I think other people do it. They may not articulate it out loud. They may do it subconsciously in their own minds. They're not willing to sort of go beyond some kind of thinking bias, some kind of thing in their thinking where they're like, I won't consider these kind of moves. I'm not willing to take this kind of risk. This is something, I doubled pawn, and this is also obviously throughout the history of chess, there have been these kinds of things. I was looking at an Alekhine game recently. I believe it was against Ove from their match, 1937. And, it was an endgame where Alekhine had a rook and a bishop, a bunch of pawns, and Ove had a rook and a knight and a bunch of pawns, and the bishop was like clearly much stronger than the knight. And I think that this is something that I'm not like great at chess history, but my understanding is like this is something that really became clear in the Fischer, era. This rook and bishop, he was beating rook and bishop against bishop and rook and knight a lot. And I was reading, this is in Alekhine's best games, collected games, and he like gives up the bishop for the knight. So, so he can play like a pure rook and pawn ending. And he's talking about how like this is the only way to go or whatever in his comments. And that's like an example of that. The computer thinks it's not the right move, and it doesn't align with, I think, how people would now would think about it. Certainly, like I thought it was very strange to give up the bishop. The bishop is so strong. Bishop covers both sides of the board, so it can help your pawns go forward. It could defend against the other side with the pawns going. I mean, it's just like to me, it was common sense and common knowledge. That's not because I'm better than Alekhine. That's just because that's what I was raised with. That was, if you want, you could call it a prejudice that I have. And so I just having the fortune of being chronologically ahead in time of Alekhine. So maybe I got a prejudice that was right, let's say in that particular case, and he had a prejudice that say that was wrong. It's just by accident, nothing I did. to earn that. But I did think when I saw that move of his, I thought, wow, that's so shocking. And then, went to read his comment that this was the way to go strategically. So what I'm trying to say is these kinds of biases about, doubled pawns or pawn structure in general, or, what's worth more, an open file or doubling your pawns, or bishop and rook versus rook and knight, or piece activity versus, let's say, structural issues or static issues. There's so many of these things in chess, right? It's all of these kinds of trade-offs, and I think that in on an individual level, people have these kinds of things, these kind of heuristics or these kind of beliefs inside of their own mind. They think certain openings are good, even though they, let's say they give up a huge space advantage or whatever it is. Again, part of that is that the understanding of chess is moving forward. People are finding solutions to things that used to they couldn't. So if you're standing in place the whole time and you're not kind of moving ahead, then that's going to be an issue. So I think that's one of the main obstacles for people's improvement. That gets back to being honest, doing self-analysis, being self-aware, to use your term. Self-awareness is closely correlated, I think, with honesty, being open to the questioning your beliefs, and then also the foundation for those beliefs. Where are these beliefs coming from, and let me identify them. What beliefs do I have? Like I said, that part of that is one of the challenges with that is that for some people, I think some of them are subconscious. They may not even be super aware, but if you start to look at a number of your games, you might recognize a pattern. Every time somebody starts to attack me, I panic. Every time, I never sacrifice the exchange, for example. With that being said, the question that you asked about adults don't have a lot of time to improve, what can they do? I think one of the best things that they can do, this is with having respect for your other observation, which is that not everybody's the same. And I think there are exceptions to the rules and people learn differently. But I think studying the games and the thought processes of great players, the history of chess, it kind of opens your mind. Even studying one great game, you spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes just looking at one amazing game where you can look at a situation and somebody does something that's totally, it's not intuitive, because that's really where the growth happens, right? It's like you look at a position, it looks totally normal. You want to make some kind of totally like banal move, develop your piece, castles, right? And then seeing, right, somebody who's a chess great, how they made a completely different move and how there's this whole thought process behind it. That just kind of like expands your mind, I think, in a way that I think that's where the growth really happens. Like for example, King E7, in the Karpov-Kamsky, game, and suddenly you realize that this queen on H4 is like completely out of play. There's a great video where Karpov shows this game online, like an iChess video or something. Karpov-Kasparov, King's Indian. Kasparov lands his knight on D3, completely paralyzes Karpov. He's like sacrificed all these pawns and everything. He's just completely paralyzing him. When you see these ideas, they're just like absolutely amazing. It's sort of like if you're like a writer and you write some stories and then you've never read Shakespeare before, and suddenly you read Shakespeare or whatever, Stephen King, somebody in your genre. Not to say Stephen King's like Shakespeare, but let's say you want to write like, but you see something like a master of the craft, of whatever you're doing. I think it just kind of expands your mind. You're like, wow. And you just start to have all of your mind opens up. And I think that that's the key, right? I mean, literally we say closed-mindedness, open-mindedness, right? But like, I think that's sort of one of the ways to unlock some of those, thoughts that are being kept at bay, is just to see these classic examples. Obviously, Kasparov Topalov, 1999, runs his king around. And then you have to take some risk. You have to try some things in your own games. And a lot of times, I think another thing that holds people back is that a lot of times when your mind expands for the first time, you actually go backwards at first. You have to take some, and I think people are very unwilling to do that. They'd rather kind of like dig in where they are, even if it means they're not going forward. They don't want to lose to somebody that they would have. There's a pride thing, like I always beat this guy. This guy's my customer, right? And I know how to beat this guy. So now why would I try something different? Why would I step out of my comfort zone? Now I might lose to this person, and then I'm going to feel really bad. But I think you have to do it. I think you've got to do it. And the last thing I'll say about it is, actually, maybe not the last thing. One other thing I'll say about it, maybe two more things. One thing is, I think that this is something that basically all the great players have in common. Like, again, there might be an exception here and there. There might be some people who talk about it more than others, but like all of the great chess players have sort of soaked up the history of chess, right? So it can't be a coincidence, right? Like uh Bobby Fischer, you can see him on YouTube talking about Morphy and Steinitz and Capablanca and Alekhine and Botvinnik and Petrosian, Spassky. Like he knew all of their games, not just like one or two, but like, he had seen all of them, right? All of these guys, the people I just named, they all knew their predecessors. I think it's not a coincidence. And even people I think you don't think of, I think, even a lot of modern players, they know more than you think about these kind of things. So the one other thing I want to say is, of course, with these great players, they had different styles, right? So like Alekhine, let's say, Tal, Kasparov, AlphaZero, right? Sort of like in one style, let's say dynamic, sacrificial. Then you've got, people like Ulf Anderson, not necessarily world champions, right? But like Ulf Anderson, Petrosian, Karpov, let's say, Kramnik even, are of a different kind of style. I think one good way to sort your studying, is to sort of study by style, and then you can sort of see if there's something that's resonating with you more, something that makes more sense to you, something that you feel like you can emulate a little bit better. I think that's a good way of studying as well.
Yeah, it's a nice history lesson there.
Like I said, I'm not the guy, that's not like my super area of specialty, but
right, but you believe in the instructional value of the classics.
yeah, I mean, and it's like it's not just chess, right? If you do this with anybody, with any topic, anybody who's good at like anything, like I just have you're gonna have to try really hard to think, like find an author who hasn't read, the top, classic authors, right? Like find, ask Stephen King if he's read Tolstoy or if he's read Shakespeare or if he's read, right? You're not gonna find someone, Agatha Christie, you're not gonna say, hey, have you ever, and they're, oh, who's that? I've never heard of that. Right. Even, or right, find a mathematician who doesn't know, Gödel, or I don't know, Galileo, or Newton, or find a physicist, right? Like all these people who are making discoveries that you may think like have nothing to do with it. Or now we're in the computer age, you might think you just need the computer, right? Okay, now, why would an author today who's writing, let's say, little children's books or, mystery novels know anything about, some like playwright from the 1500s? But like I found, like almost without exception, or like modern art, right? Like what was his name? The guy who like basically just splashes paint, like on a canvas. It looks like some child who just like, dumped the paint. And it turns out, or like Picasso, right? Turned out like Picasso was like really, really superb as like a classical artist, right? Like he had studied and knew like the techniques of, Leonardo da Vinci and whatever, Michelangelo and Rembrandt and all these people, right? And you're like, well, you're doing something that on the surface looks extremely different. So what's the value? And I think that's actually a little bit, in the beginning, I said education, there's sort of a science to it, but there's also like a level of mystery. Maybe that part is a little mysterious, like exactly where the connection is. Maybe a lot of it is just inspiration to some extent, but yeah, it's like, to me, it's such overwhelming. The data is so overwhelming there that, I think there's got to be some connection there.
I want to end with one more segment. I want to talk about a couple of books that you wrote, Dan. And one of them, I'm looking on Amazon. One of them, there's only one left in stock. It looks like it's flying off the shelves here.
Yeah, I don't know if that's what
I always wondered. Does Amazon just put that because they want you to buy?
I think that's what
I feel
that
like
is.
everything I look at, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a chess book or like a toilet handle. It's everything I look on Amazon. It could be like a pack of pens. It's only 3 left in stock. I don't know. Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm an easy target. I don't know. Anyway.
So first of all, I just got my royalty check. I get it every 6 months. So I get it. I just got mine. So I can promise you, I won't tell you how much it was, but I can absolutely assure you that they are not flying off the shelves. That's
Okay. I guess they just want me to buy it. But anyway, let's take each of these separately. So the first one, because I think the second one, I mean, they both look great. I think the second one might be, have a little more mass appeal, I think, to club players. But let's look at the first one, which is the 3 Queen D8, that is Black Moves, Queen D8, Scandinavian, Simple and Strong. Tell me about that one.
Okay, so once again, I may have a different take on this than you're expecting. In the last segment, you asked me, I mentioned, I sort of went on a tangent, was talking about literature, and I mentioned Tolstoy. And one of the things about Tolstoy, he wrote War and Peace and Anna Karenina and so forth, these two of the great literary classics of all time. And then he decided that they were both trash, and he tried actually to get them all burned and all the copies burned. So there's one thing I have in common with him and one thing I don't. And that the thing I have that's not in common with him is that my books are not classics of anything of any sort. And the other one that the thing that I do have in common with him is I don't really, even particularly, like recommend them or anything. But in terms of the data, I can tell you for sure that the Qd8 Scandinavian book definitely wildly outsold the second book. And I think that there's a sort of movement out there. Let's put it that way. There's like a Scandinavian club, folks who are like, diehard Scandinavian opening people. It's I don't really know how to describe it. It's like like a fan club or something like that. And for good reason. I mean, of course I talk about this in the book, which is that it's very simple to play. It's very forcing actually in a way, because you force the opponent, you don't give the opponent a lot of choice, right? When they play e4, you play d5, and now suddenly, the only principled response really is to take the pawn and pick up a tempo, let's say with knight c3. And so it's not like, if you play the Sicilian, you have to deal with the closed Sicilian, you have to deal with the Grand Prix attack, you have to deal with all of these anti-Sicilians, you have to deal with the main line within the main line of the Sicilian, right? Like on the Najdorf, it's famous on the 8th move or whatever it is. There's like literally like 13 different plausible moves for white. Rook g1, h3, rook, a3. Magnus has played, I think, b3, right? Bishop e3, f3, bishop g5, and there's like bodies and bodies and bodies of theory, and the memory load is absolutely outrageous. And it's very sharp. So you're in a lot of danger no matter which one of these lines they play. So in that sense, right? And then the evaluation objectively is maybe not even that much different than, in the Scandinavian, right? You're like slightly worse as black. So what's the big deal? But you kind of dictate the tempo. Actually, you have a lot more say in the direction of the game. And so it's much, the preparation load is much lighter. You can play on a lot of strategical concepts. It's not very concrete. So like one of the feedback points you'll see like that people say about the book is they say, well, like it's a little light on, let's say, concrete variations, right? Like it's not like, like I'm thinking of the old MCO, like back when I was a kid by De Fermian, right? And you could like go through every single line and every single move. It's not exactly structured in that way because, it's not such a big difference, especially at the club player level, between white's different moves. They don't fundamentally alter the character of the game. In some openings, they do. Like if you think about the Kaira Khan, right, which is in some ways like the closest cousin to let's say, to the Scandinavian, e4, c6, d4, d5. Well, there's an enormous difference now in terms of the game is going to require a very different set of skills and knowledge and a different toolkit if white plays knight c3, and you exchange on e4, or if white plays e5, the advanced variation. Okay, now white is claiming space. It's a completely different pawn structure. White is going to attack on the king side, maybe h4, these kind of lines. Then there's the Panov-Botvinnik attack, e takes g5 and c4. Now you're playing an isolated queen's pawn structure, an entirely different body of knowledge and information, a way to handle chess, different, kind of skills involved in terms of like the balance between, calculation and memory and so forth, right? All of these skills coming into play, totally different. Now there's also this line like knight f3, was it knight c3 and d3? Maybe you exchange queen, you get like a queenless middle game. Again, very different character of position, different, requires different balance of the chess skills. So, those things are what make chess very, very challenging, right? And like I said, I mean, it's going to be challenging no matter what you do. Chess is a really hard game. But I think what's really nice about the Scandinavian, from a practical perspective, is that you right away, it's not white doesn't really have that same kind of choice. White, the pawn is under attack immediately, and the options are not objectively equal, like they are, like I just mentioned with the Kaira Khan, right? you could say that more or less the advanced variation, the mainline knight c3, the old mainline, let's say, the Panov bot Vinnick attack, objectively speaking, all of the great players have played all of them. So you can't say that like one is, clearly better than the other. So in other words, if you play the Caro-Kann, you're going to have to be prepared for all of these different kinds of systems. And it's your opponent who's deciding which one you're going to have to deal with. You may not be in the mood for, a memory fight in the advanced variation, but that's what you'll have to deal with. You may, or you may not be in the mood for an isolated queen pawn, but that's what you'll have to deal with. But with the Scandinavian, I mean, basically 99.9% of the time, you're going to get the same, very similar character of position. So that's very comforting. That's very comforting. And it's kind of unique. I mean, I think most openings don't give you that same consistency. And then, it's actually, the ideas, once you have the sort of ideas there, it's relatively easy to handle. You have this open D file, that kind of like suggests, where to put some of your pieces. You're going to have good control of, usually your pawns go to E6 and C6, your bishop, you try to get it outside of the pawn chain. It's all very kind of natural and so forth. Now, obviously no opening is, perfect. Otherwise, everyone would just play that one opening over and over and over again, right? I mean, but I think that the weaknesses, the downside, what you're giving in the Scandinavian, especially in the Queen D8 line, which is the one that I recommended, at the club player level, are not the kinds of things that club players, even up through expert, I would say, are really prepared to take advantage of. It requires like a very energetic play, because basically all you've got for it is like a tempo. Even the tempo is a little bit questionable to some extent, because the knight on c3 is actually not always optimally placed on c3, because I'm going to put my pawn on c6, right? And so that limits, that's basically, sort of semi-dominating your knight. So the knight on c3 often has to move again. And like sometimes you'd rather have the two pawns in the center, d4 and c4. But now your knight is standing in the way of your c pawn. So there are ways, of course, to make use of that. But like I said, it's not the kind of thing I think that, the majority of your opponents are going to be able to carry out, in that kind of a precise way for the number of moves that they would need to do it. So I think basically the advantage that white gets sort of dissipates in the next few moves. The advantage they get from you having given this, from this tempo. And then you get just basically to use the ideas that and that you're more familiar with and more experienced with. So, so that's why I was very enthusiastic about that line. I sort of stumbled upon it myself. This was in the period, it really helped me to make master, actually, because I was sort of an expert, and it really helped me to solidify, get those 300 games to get that life master, because I was playing a lot of lower rated players. Another thing that's part of my background is when I got to, after college, I moved to Connecticut, and I opened my own chess club along with my best friend and partner, business partner at the time in Norwalk, Connecticut. We opened a chess club. And one of the things we did was we ran quads, every weekend. That was a popular format over there. And, I'd often be like in a quad where I was like one of the higher players, but the other players were, like expert level, because it was a quad. So, I needed something where, and I was playing them all the time, a lot of times the same people. So I needed something where, was kind of low maintenance on my part. And I could at the same time, I could play it fairly regularly and feel kind of confident in it. And, it took me a while, but like I said, eventually I experimented with some things. I eventually stumbled on this, and like my results were really good. And I started to get like, a sort of critical mass or fair number of games under my belt where I was like pretty comfortable, and getting comfortable positions and having great results, and not having to, do a lot of repairs every time that I would trot it out for the next game, and so that's sort of where eventually I was like, I looked at the literature, and I was like, at the time, this was over 10 years ago, easily, I was like, I don't really see a lot of literature on this. I saw like Michael Adams had played it a few times. I got in touch with Michael Adams about the book. He was really supportive. There were like a couple of, I think maybe like an article, or, it's not like nobody had ever played it before or talked about it before, but there certainly was no book on it. And I just thought, look, if people like, this has been really helpful to me, and I feel like club players, it would be helpful to them. If it worked for me, why can't it work for someone else? I'd love to share some knowledge. And it was my first book. So I was like, oh, that'd be cool. Try to write a book. And, yeah, so that's sort of the origin story of that. And I think definitely it's far outsold the second book. And I got a good amount of positive feedback about it. So I think that's been nice.
Yeah, looking at the reviews, they're good. The 3 Queen D8 Scandinavian, simple and strong. That one, there's only 2 left in stock. More on the way. At least that's what it says. I don't know if anyone's listening. See what yours says. That's what mine says. I feel like they do that to, like they target those. I don't know. My computer says only 2 left. Now let's talk about one last thing before I let you go. Your other book, where again there's only 1 left in stock. It says it's called, I should say, Opening Originals Strong Sidelines for Club Cats, assuming is about some opening sidelines, maybe some off-book ideas that work well for club players. Seems very interesting. Maybe you could just talk about that one a little bit.
Yeah, so this was sort of the sort of like uh idea, I guess, came from a similar place in the sense that these were things again that I had sort of stumbled upon in one way or the other. Some of them were kind of like old ideas that hadn't been used in a long time, but really never seemed to have been like refuted in any kind of way. Others were things. A couple of them became quite topical. Like I think there's a line in there in the Cairo Khan, E4 C6 D4 D5 in the advanced variation, E5 C5. That like basically turned into some huge, like nowadays, I think people quite recently, in fact, in the last, I would say 6 months to a year, I've been seeing a lot of that on the board. But of course, this book was written, I don't know, 6 years ago or something like that. So it's kind of a diverse sort of set of lines. Basically, it's just, these kind of wrinkles. Some of them happened in mainline openings, but they were little wrinkles, like in the King's Indian Defense. I was playing a lot of the knight to d7. Now, again, if you study games from the heyday of the King's Indian, like the 50s and the 60s, and Bronstein and Nydorf or whoever, all these people, were playing it. Then, there's no surprise there at all. I had an idea that I saw from a Fischer game in the Ruy Lopez, I remember, where the knight comes to h4 very early, in like one of the main lines. Again, knight h4 is kind of a thematic idea to some extent, but you just never see it at that particular place. So they're like, these little kind of adjustments that kind of, give the game a little bit of a different character. And if you happen to know kind of, you have your sort of guiding light, your North Star, where you're headed, and the other person isn't really quite sure exactly what you're up to, then it can kind of give you an edge. And I tried to, I think, pick things that were not like going to be, it wasn't like a tactical trick where the whole thing falls apart if the person knows like one or two moves. It's more of like a conceptual thing. It's interesting looking back, like I said, because some of the things remain very obscure. Others, are now like much more popular. Some of them, I think that the modern engines, can give the opponent a bigger, let's say, edge if they do the right thing than I understood, than the computers understood at the time that I wrote it, and that I understood. But again, it was just sort of like, these are things that I at the time I was playing a lot of games, and because it was my chess club, so it was like I was playing like basically like, let's say, at least 6 tournament games a week, and sometimes more. And so, and that went on for years. And so, I needed things, I was kind of picking up a lot of ideas, and I needed things that, could kind of throw people off a little here and there. And so it was kind of, it was easy to collect some of this. And then of course I had a lot of games. So then I could use my own games, sort of as examples. So yeah, that's sort of how that came about.
Dan, I think I'm going to end it there. This was a fascinating discussion. Very, very philosophical, very deep, very good. Sort of deep dive into the sort of mindset / philosophical kind of end of it, right? Kind of nice to just get away from tactics and just some practical things. We touched on that a bit, but I enjoyed this sort of a deeper dive into just the whole general approach. Your books sound fantastic. We'll put links for those. So, National Master Daniel Lowinger, thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Great discussion. And for all of you listening at home, we really appreciate it. And I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.